I paid for the whole wedding and got a seat right next to the emergency exit. Lovely, right? Not even in the photos did I make an appearance. But you know what? That's fine. I just stood up, smiled, and quietly changed my will without telling anyone. Hi, I'm Louise, and this is the story of how I finally chose myself and stopped being just the mom who pays the bills. Subscribe to our channel and watch until the end, because this story doesn't end the way you think it will. I'll never forget the day she called me. It wasn't anything special, or at least it didn't seem like it. Just a quick, direct call, like so many others. Mom, I need to talk to you about the wedding. My heart filled with joy. After all, what mother doesn't want to be part of one of the most important days of her daughter's life? Before I even heard the actual request, I was already dreaming, helping her pick the dress, being part of the planning, standing by her side like I always had. But it only took a few seconds to realize my role would be different. She didn't ask for my opinion, didn't wonder if I wanted to help with the details. She was straight to the point. Mom, I wanted to know if you could pay for the wedding. Daniel and I are a bit tight. I swallowed hard. On the other end of the line, the woman I had raised alone with so much effort was once again asking me to set myself aside. Not for the first time. In fact, I realized right then, with a familiar ache in my chest, that I'd been doing this all along. Funding dreams, covering mistakes, holding everything together, and in the end, barely being remembered. I took a deep breath and, like always, I said yes. After all, what's a few more thousands in debt compared to seeing my daughter happy? I remembered the time I sold my mother's gold ring to pay her law school enrollment. She never knew, never cared to know, just like she didn't know that I skipped buying my medications to help with the down payment for the car she wanted so badly. I always thought that being a mom meant this: a quiet presence, unconditional support, even if invisible. While she went on excitedly about the party, the catering, the photographer, I listened in silence, smiling on the outside and breaking on the inside. She listed vendors like she was reading off a script, where my role was already defined, the financier. It never crossed her mind that I might want to be part of the decisions, or that I might not even be able to afford it. She just assumed I would, like I always did. I hung up the phone and sat there in the armchair, staring at the picture frame with our photo, that one from her graduation. I smiled, remembering how I sat hidden in the crowd, because the invitations were limited, and, according to her, it'd be better to give them to her closest friends. That day, too, I paid for everything: the dress, the shoes, the after-party, but I wasn't on the stage, not even in the official photo. That hurt, but I let it go. After all, it was her day. I started crunching numbers, going over my savings. That trip I had dreamed of for years, my first trip abroad, would have to be postponed again. It was supposed to be to celebrate my retirement, a gift to myself, after a lifetime of work. But when I looked at the budget, it was clear: either my daughter's wedding or my dreams. And once again, I chose her, not because she forced me to, but because that's what I'd always done. In the days that followed, her messages were always short. Mom, can you transfer this amount? Mom, I booked the caterer. Mom, I need you to pay the photographer by Friday. No. How are you? No asking if I wanted to help choose the menu or the decor. I'd become just a resource, a bank account with a name and a face. Have you ever felt that? Being more of a function than a presence? More of a support than a companion? Sometimes I think this is a pain many of us carry, in silence. Slowly, I started realizing that maybe it had never really been all that different. Since she was little, I did everything, ran everywhere, fought for it all. And in the end, not even an invite to her housewarming party. I only found out through the photos she posted. But I didn't want to think about that now. I wanted to believe that this wedding would be different, that this time she'd see me not as the mom who handles things, but as the mom who is there. The new dress I bought was also my armor, a desperate attempt to make myself present, visible, honored. While she talked about the flowers and the wedding favors, I could only think about everything I'd already done for her. The sleepless nights during her asthma attacks, the afternoons I skipped work to take her to tournaments, the years I went without buying myself clothes so she could have the books she wanted. So many moments when I was there, and so many when I was forgotten. And now, once again, here I was, repeating the cycle, giving everything I had, without even knowing if, at the very least, I'd be invited to the official photo. But a quiet voice inside me started whispering, what if this time it's different? What if this is the last time? I swallowed the ache, took a deep breath, and transferred the money she asked for. Like always, but maybe for the last time. And I had no idea that this transfer wouldn't just be financial, but the first installment of a new version of me. As I was organizing the bank transfer receipts, I paused for a moment, staring at my phone screen. The total I'd sent her, added to what I'd already paid, was almost the same amount I spent back when she graduated. A cycle that kept repeating, quietly, automatically, without me even realizing it. And, like a silent, cruel film, my mind started replaying other scenes. So many times I was there. So many times I gave, I sacrificed. And in the end, I was forgotten. I remembered her. At 8 years old, hospitalized with severe pneumonia, I quit my job without a second thought, just so I could stay by her side, sleeping in hospital chairs, living on reheated coffee and prayer. And years later, during her high school graduation speech, she thanked her father, the one who was barely ever around. But she didn't even mention my name. I stood, clapping proudly, with tears in my eyes. No one knew that those tears were also of pain. Then came college. She really wanted to study out of town, in another city. I didn't hesitate. I sold my mother's gold ring, the one that was supposed to be passed down, generation to generation, just to make sure she had enough for the enrollment and the first month's rent. I never told her. I figured I didn't need to. After all, a mother gives, doesn't ask, doesn't throw it in their face. That's what I was taught, and that's what I did. Later, she called me excited. Mom, I got an internship. I was so happy, even though, for a long time after, I kept paying her rent and sending her money to help with expenses. It didn't matter. The important thing was that she graduated, became independent. But then, when she bought her first car, with the money from that job, she didn't even invite me for the first ride. I saw the pictures on social media. Her boyfriend, their friends, smiling in the back seat. And me? Just the mom, who helped with the down payment and the first installments. Then there was the housewarming. She moved into the apartment she bought with her husband. And, as always, I helped with everything. I donated furniture, bought kitchenware, helped with the move. On the day of the party, I arrived early to help with the food, spent hours in the kitchen organizing everything. When the event started, she left me there, invisible, while she showed the apartment to her friends, took pictures, made toasts. In none of those photos was I there. Later, when I went to the bathroom, I saw the images being posted. Our first big event in our home. I felt a lump in my throat, but I swallowed it. Like always, I also remember when she went through that rough patch with her fiancé, thinking he had cheated on her. She came to my place, cried for nights in my arms, and I was there, strong, comforting, advising, being the foundation she always knew she could fall back on. Then, when it was all sorted out, she went back to her life, to her friends, to her fiancé. And me? I stayed in the same chair where she cried, alone, replaying how I've always been a refuge, but never the destination. Do you know what that feels like? To be shelter, but never home? To have a heart that's always open, but never chosen as someone's safe place? How many times did I skip buying clothes for myself, cancel trips, pass on taking classes, just to make sure she had the best? I lost count. I got used to being the last thing on the list, the footnote in her story, and most of the time, I thought that's exactly what I was supposed to be. A mother's love is sacrificial, they say, and I, more than anyone, lived that truth to its absolute limit. Now, with this new request to pay for the wedding, I catch myself thinking, has anything really changed? Or, deep down, did I always know that once again I'd be called to give and then to be forgotten? The strangest part is, even knowing all this, I didn't hesitate, still don't, because my love for her is so visceral. It doesn't allow me to say no. But for the first time, I'm starting to ask myself, how long can I keep doing this? I closed the laptop, looked around my quiet house, full of objects that remind me of her journey. The childhood drawings, the school report cards, the birthday photos I planned, all by myself. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a twinge of anger, not at her, but at myself, for allowing my story to always be just the supporting act, and hers for never demanding a place in the photos, the speeches, the memories. And now, with this wedding, I realize maybe I won't even be invited to be in the pictures. Maybe once again, I'll just be the one who paid for it all and stayed in the background. That thought, painful as it was, didn't feel foreign. On the contrary, it felt like my whole life. And maybe it's time to change the script. The days that followed were a blur of activity. My daughter kept sending messages with quotes, contracts, deadlines, always in an urgent tone. Mom, I need you to transfer this amount by tomorrow. I've booked the decorator. I'll send you the invoice. I always replied quickly, making sure nothing went wrong. But as the preparations went on, an uncomfortable feeling started creeping in. I wasn't part of the decisions, just the payments. She didn't invite me to visit the venues, or to taste the menu, or to pick out the flowers. She just kept sending invoices, as if it were natural that I'd be there, invisible but functional. When I offered to go with her to pick out the dress, I thought she'd be excited. I always imagined that would be one of the most special moments between mother and daughter. But her response was quick and cold. Oh, Mom, I'm going with the girls. You'd have no patience for this. I tried to smile, hiding the disappointment, and just said, all right, sweetheart, show me later. I spent the rest of the day thinking, since when did I become the person she avoids? As if I were a burden, an unwelcome presence. I had always been the one who went with her to everything, who celebrated every achievement, who held her through every failure. And now I was just someone she needed to keep at arm's length. Even so, I kept contributing however I could. I remembered every detail she mentioned on the phone, made a point of researching cheaper vendors, sending options, looking up references. But every time I sent something, her answer was always the same. Already handled it with Daniel's mom. That phrase, repeated so many times, it became a silent refrain, echoing in my mind. Already handled it with Daniel's mom. Already handled it. Suddenly, I realized she was building this story with another woman by her side, and not me. I mentioned it to a friend. She tried to comfort me. Oh, that's just how it is. Brides like to have the mother-in-law close, to please the groom's family. But I knew it wasn't just that. It was a choice, even if an unconscious one. She was choosing another woman to live this moment with, a moment that, after everything we'd been through, should have been ours. I had always been the mom who stayed, who took care of her, who fought for her, who played both roles. And now I was just the one who pays. And maybe not even that. She truly recognized what hurt me the most was realizing that even feeling all of this, I couldn't express it. I didn't want to seem bitter or like I was begging for a place. I'd always been afraid that if I asked for love or acknowledgement, I'd come across as weak or needy. So I kept quiet, like so many times before. I swallowed the frustration and kept sending money, making spreadsheets, organizing payments, like someone fulfilling a pre-assigned role. But my heart, it was starting to show signs of exhaustion. One day she called me excited. "Mom, I finalized the decor. It looks beautiful, white and green, just the way I always wanted." I was happy for her happiness, but I couldn't help thinking the way she wanted without ever asking what I thought. Not that I wanted to impose anything. I just wanted to be part of it, to stand by her, celebrate together, to have the chance for once to share not just the bills, but also the choices. But that didn't happen. And deep down, I was already starting to realize it wasn't going to. When I asked if she wanted help with the guest list, she answered, "Oh, Mom, don't worry, everything's under control." And that's when it hit me. Not only was I not being included in the preparations, but most likely I wouldn't even know who'd be there until the day itself. That cut deep, but it reminded me of so many other times when she made big decisions without even consulting me, from picking her major to getting married. I always found out afterward, as a spectator to her life. Even so, I forced myself to believe on the wedding day it would be different, that even if I hadn't been part of the backstage, she'd make me feel included there, in front of everyone. Maybe that would be my moment, to be honored, to hear a thank you, to pose for an official photo by her side. With that thought, I decided to treat myself. I bought a beautiful dress, one I'd always dreamed of wearing, even though it was far too expensive for me. I wanted to look like not the invisible mom I'd always been, but at least that day, someone who shines. As I tried the dress on in front of the mirror, I looked at myself for a long time and thought, will she notice how much I've done for her, how much I've fought for her, for us, all this time? And before the emotion overtook me, I adjusted my hair, smiled at myself, and whispered softly, "It's going to be different, it has to be." But deep down, an old voice, tired, was murmuring, "Or maybe it won't." Even so, I clung to hope. I've always clung to hope, because despite everything, she was still my daughter, my little girl, and like every mother, I still dreamed of the day when she'd finally see me, not as the one who pays, not as the footnote in her story, but as who I'd always been, the woman who loved her more than herself. And I didn't know that that day wouldn't come the way I dreamed, but maybe it would come in another form. I arrived early, like I always did, for every important event in her life. I was always the one who showed up first, to help, to make sure everything went perfectly. While the vendors were still arranging the flowers, adjusting the lighting, I sat quietly in a corner, admiring the space I helped pay for, but didn't help choose. The venue looked beautiful, just the way she wanted it, white and green, like she told me, but never showed me. I felt a quiet pride mixed with a familiar ache. Once again, I was there, but not part of it. When I looked for my name on the seating chart, I thought there must be some mistake. My name was at a table, right by the emergency exit, far from the altar, far from the dance floor, far from everything. An isolated table, shared with some distant relatives I barely knew and never really connected with. I looked around, trying to understand. Maybe it was just a simple oversight, a mistake. I walked up to the wedding planner and asked in a faint voice, "Excuse me, is this really my table?" She, without looking me in the eyes, replied, "Yes, that's right. You can take your seat." I went back to my place, sitting down carefully so I wouldn't wrinkle the new dress I had bought especially for that day. I looked around. The main table, near the altar, was filled with the groom, his parents, his sister, their closest friends. Daniel's mom was there, beaming, posing for pictures with my daughter, as if she were her mother. And me? I was there, off to the side, like just another guest, a background extra in a scene that, not so long ago, I believed I'd be starring in. The ceremonies began, and I smiled, clapped, tried to look happy. After all, it was her day. With every speech, my chest tightened more. The groom's father spoke. The groom's mother spoke. Their friends spoke. And me? I wasn't called up, not even mentioned. I kept wondering, did anyone here know that I paid for all of this? That the flowers decorating the altar, that fancy catering, that stunning dress, all of it had a piece of me in it? But no one knew. No one seemed to care. When the photo session started, I stood up quietly, adjusted my hair, and waited for a glance from my daughter, a nod, an invitation to join them. But she was too busy, surrounded by the groom's family and their friends. The photographer, rushing, called out, "Now, photo with the groom's parents!" And me, I sat there, watching everything from my table, distant, like an invisible spectator. At no point did anyone say, "Now, a photo with the bride's mother." Maybe they didn't even think of it. I tried to approach once, during the cake cutting, but I was gently stopped by one of the organizers. "Now, just the couple and the bridal party, okay?" I nodded, went back to my table, and sat down, pretending not to care. I picked up a glass of champagne and just sat there, watching, swallowing hard, smiling at the people passing by, who didn't even notice that I was the bride's mother. I wasn't even sure what hurt more, being invisible or realizing that deep down I'd always been. While everyone laughed, snapped selfies, I just stared at my plate, fiddling with the napkin. No appetite, no desire to get up. The waiter came over. "May I take your plate, ma'am?" I just nodded, even though I hadn't touched the food. It didn't make sense, being there. None of it made sense. And in that moment, a certainty cut through me like a blade. I wasn't being forgotten. I was being deliberately erased. I stayed until the end of the party. As always, I stayed through everything, helping to gather a few keepsakes, saying goodbye to a few people who barely knew who I was. My daughter, amid all the commotion, just gave me a quick hug and said, "Thanks for everything, Mom. We'll talk later, okay?" Later, always later. I grabbed my purse, straightened my dress, and walked out of the venue, quietly, without visible tears, but with my chest collapsing in silence. I got in the car, closed the door, and sat there for a few minutes before starting the engine. I looked at my hands, still trembling, and thought about everything I'd done to make that day happen, everything I'd given up, everything I'd given. And once again, I realized I wasn't in a single photo, not mentioned in a single speech, no official memory of that day. I was just the one who paid, just the one who stayed in the background. As I drove home through the silent midnight streets, I felt that in that brightly lit venue, at that crowded party, something inside me had finally gone dark too. And maybe, just maybe, this would be the last time I'd ever let that happen. But did I even know how to be any different? The days after the wedding were strangely silent. No calls, no messages, other than a formal, "Thanks, Mom." Everything was perfect. Perfect. I thought, perfect for who? For her, certainly. For me, there was just that gnawing emptiness, like watching the end of show that I had played in intensely, but without anyone ever knowing that I was backstage, holding everything up so it wouldn't fall apart. I looked at the dress I wore to the wedding, still hanging on the closet door, and thought, why is it still there? Why can't I put it away? Little by little, the official wedding photos started popping up on social media. She sent me a few, without any caption, as if sending a statement, not a gesture of affection. I opened the gallery, scrolling through the images with a kind of silent masochism, searching, but not finding myself. Not a single photo with me, not even a trace of that quick hug she gave me at the end of the night. Just shots with the groom, his family, the bridesmaids, and, of course, Daniel's mom, who seemed to have taken the place that naively I once thought was mine. Each caption felt like a quiet stab. The happiest day of my life, surrounded by the people I love most. Those who've always been by my side. My rock, my strength. Phrases that, to anyone else, would sound lovely, but to me, they sounded like confirmations that, in her story, I was never the main character. I stared at the screen for long minutes, until I realized my hands were trembling and my eyes filled with tears. I didn't sob out loud. I just let the pain settle silently, as I had long since learned to do. Some friends, when they found out I wasn't in the photos, were outraged. But you paid for everything. How could she be so ungrateful? Others tried to comfort me. That's just how daughters are. One day she'll realize. I listened to all of it, stayed silent through all of it. I've always been good at staying silent ever since. Her father left, and I had to swallow my pride, to raise her alone, without complaining, without showing weakness. But now, I realized the silence I kept was no longer strength. It was becoming resignation. One rainy afternoon, I sat on the couch and started sorting through some old paperwork. I found the wedding folder, contracts, receipts, invoices, everything meticulously organized, like I always did. I looked at each paper with a strange detachment, as if reviewing the financials of an investment that never paid off. For the first time, I thought, why did I do all this? Out of love or out of fear? Fear of not being loved, of being forgotten, of no longer having a role in her life. The answer hurt. I think it was both. I always gave with love, but also from that paralyzing fear that if I wasn't useful, she wouldn't want me around. And now, seeing that, even after being so useful, I was still discarded, I realized it was never about what I did, but about what I represented. To her, a guaranteed presence, an unconditional availability. But maybe that was my mistake. I was always there, always said yes, and so she never needed to notice me. I started realizing that the emptiness I felt now wasn't new. It was just more obvious, more exposed, without the distractions of tasks, the bank transfers, the maternal duties. That always kept me busy. Now, with nothing left to organize or manage, it was just me, and what was left of me. And in that silent space, an uncomfortable idea began to form. What if I started pulling away too? Not out of revenge, but as survival. I didn't call her in the days that followed, didn't send messages asking how the honeymoon was, if they were happy. I left my phone silent, without that usual anxiety, to check if she needed anything. And to my surprise, she didn't call either, didn't ask how I was, if I got home safely, if I enjoyed the wedding. Her silence showed me what maybe I'd never had the courage to admit. She didn't miss my presence, just my function. As the weeks went by, I started going out more alone. Went to the movies for the first time in years. Bought a new book. Had lunch out with no rush. And in each of those small gestures, I felt a strange freedom. At the same time, a deep sadness, realizing that maybe I had always lived more for her than for myself. And now, without that mission, all that was left was to learn how to live for me. That night, before bed, I stared at the ceiling and thought, maybe this is it. Maybe it's finally time to choose me. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and, for the first time since the wedding, fell asleep, without dreaming of her, without waiting for a call, without imagining an apology. That would never come. I just slept in peace, or at least something close to it. But I didn't know that the silence was only the beginning of a decision that would change everything. It was on a quiet afternoon, while sorting through some paperwork, that I stumbled upon my will. There it was, untouched, written years ago, with her name in bold, as the sole beneficiary. I read each line, slowly, like reading an old note, and realizing it no longer made sense. I didn't cry. I didn't feel anger. Just a strange serenity, a clarity that cut right through me. Maybe it was time to change this too. After all, who am I, if not someone who has always lived, to guarantee her future, even though in the present she never once worried about mine? I closed the folder and left it on the table, walked over to the balcony, looked out over the city skyline, the same view I had watched so many times while waiting for her to get home late, while worrying if she was safe, if she needed anything. Now, the phone didn't ring. There were no messages, no invites for coffee. For the first time, I felt the true weight of solitude, but along with it, a strange freedom. Maybe, I thought, this is the moment when mothers learn to stop being just mothers and start being women again. In the days that followed, I started going through things that had been untouched for years. I found an old list scribbled in a yellowed notebook with dreams I had saved for when I had time. Take a painting class, learn how to dance tango, visit Paris, plant a garden on the balcony. I smiled, reading through each item, like finding a forgotten version of myself. Why, I wondered, had I never done any of these? The answer was obvious and painful, because I'd always been too busy living my daughter's life. I decided that wouldn't be the case anymore. No big speeches, no dramatic declarations, just quietly reorganizing my life. I went to the travel agency, and with what money I still had left, booked a trip to Paris, the same trip I had postponed to pay for her wedding. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't need to. I didn't want applause or validation. I just wanted to go. I wanted, for the first time, to do something that was solely mine, without my identity being tied to being someone's mother. I also scheduled an appointment at the notary to revise my will. When the clerk asked, "Are you sure about these changes?" I answered, with a calm smile, "Yes, I am." I left part of my estate to an organization that helps women in vulnerable situations. The rest I divided among nieces, dear friends, and a small portion for myself, so that in whatever years I still had left, I could live with the dignity I had always denied myself in the name of a love that was deeply misunderstood. As I signed the documents, I thought about the letter I had started writing after the wedding. It was tucked away in the nightstand drawer, unfinished, full of scribbles and messy emotions. I thought about finishing it, about explaining to my daughter why I was making these choices. But in that moment, I realized I didn't need to. She probably wouldn't understand or would understand. Too late. And either way, this decision wasn't for her. It was finally for me. I went back home, made some tea, and sat in the living room chair, the same one where I had spent so many hours waiting for calls that never came. I picked up a new book I'd recently bought, but when I opened it, I realized I couldn't focus. My mind was still wandering through the hallways of that wedding venue, through that isolated corner where I'd been placed, through those photos I wasn't in, and more than that, through the countless other scenes in her life where I had been, but was never seen. I took a deep breath, closed the book, and decided that from now on, I would no longer be invisible. I wouldn't make a scene, wouldn't cut ties dramatically. I would just quietly change my place in the story. If until now, I'd always been the one who offered, the one who made herself available, who always ran after. Now, I would be the one who chooses, and if she wanted me there, she could come to me. I wouldn't offer myself anymore. The following week, she sent a message. "Hi, Mom. How are you? Call me later. I want to tell you some things." I read it, put the phone down, and went to tend to my plants on the balcony. I didn't call. I didn't rush. I didn't ask what it was about. I just let time pass, like she had so often done with me, and realizing that I felt an unexpected peace. It wasn't revenge. It was simply balance. That night, before bed, I thought about the trip, about the changes I'd made, and I smiled. For the first time in a long time, I felt that I was in control of my life, not because someone gave me that place, but because finally I had put myself there. And as I turned off the light, I knew for certain this was perhaps the quietest and most definitive decision of my life. But I didn't know that this quiet decision would soon be tested. It was on a Sunday afternoon when the phone rang and her name flashed on the screen, like so many times before. For a second, I thought about not answering, but out of habit, I slid my finger across and brought the phone to my ear. "Hi, Mom, how are you?" she said, with a voice softer than usual. I responded politely, without that automatic enthusiasm that always took over me whenever she called. On the other end, a brief silence, as if she had realized, for the first time, that something was different. "I was wondering if we could grab dinner this week. It's been a while since I've seen you," she said, with a slight hesitation. I smiled, a smile she couldn't see, but one that carried not joy, but a strange serenity. "I can't this week, sweetie. I've got other plans." The words came out naturally, without guilt, without any need to explain. On the other end, I could feel her surprise, almost shock. She took a few seconds before replying. "Wow, you never say no." "That's right. I thought. I never did. Never turned down an invite. Never refused a favor. Never put my plans before hers. But now, things were different. Things changed, sweetheart." I answered, with a voice that was firm, but still affectionate. She chuckled, trying to lighten the mood. "Okay, but are you mad at me?" The question hung in the air, like an attempt to probe, to maybe understand what was going on. I paused a moment before replying. "No, I'm not mad. I've just learned to prioritize those who prioritize me." I said it with the calm of someone who, for the first time, speaks the truth, without fear of seeming ungrateful or selfish. On the other end, silence. I know she was at a loss for words, maybe not even fully understanding what I meant, but I knew, and for the first time, I felt in control of my own story, without needing to be understood, to be respected. She tried to change the subject, quickly talking about work, the new house, a weekend spent with the in-laws. I listened in silence, just replying with monosyllables. I knew she could sense my distance, but couldn't name it. And honestly, she didn't need to. It wasn't punishment. It wasn't revenge. It was just the natural consequence of years in a lopsided relationship where I was always the one who ran after, who fixed things, who was always available. Before hanging up, she insisted, "Seriously, Mom, let's plan something? We barely see each other anymore." I almost smiled at the irony of that sentence, as if she didn't realize that this barely seeing each other had always been true. Only now, for the first time, it wasn't because of me. "We'll see. I'll let you know when I have time," I replied with that same serenity. She said a quick, "Love you," and I responded, "Me too." But as I hung up, I realized that for the first time, I didn't feel that familiar anxiety to chase after, to do more, to prove my love. I sat there on the couch, staring at the phone screen, where her name still lingered for a few seconds before fading away. I took a deep breath, leaned my head back, and stayed there, in silence, not sad, but relieved. Finally, I was learning not to lose myself in this relationship. Finally, I was allowing myself to be, before anything else, a whole woman, and not just a mother who exists for her daughter. That night, I went out to dinner, alone. I went to that restaurant I'd always wanted to try, but never did because it wasn't kid-friendly, or because there wasn't time. I ordered wine, ate slowly, savored every bite, without rushing, watching the people around me, without feeling out of place or guilty. And at the end of the meal, as I paid the bill, I realized this is what it means to choose yourself. It's not about excluding those you love, but about no longer allowing yourself to be excluded from your own life. When I got home, I looked into the mirror by the front door, and for the first time, I recognized myself, not as the mother of the bride, not as the mom who paid for the wedding, not as the mom at the table by the exit, but as a woman who, after a lifetime of sacrifice, finally learned to set boundaries. And in that realization, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: pride. Little did I know that this new boundary would soon be put to the test. The days went by, and little by little, I realized that my time, once so consumed by worrying about her, now belonged to me. I started waking up later, taking my breakfast slowly, listening to music, while watering the plants on my balcony. Simple things, almost insignificant, but they filled me in a way I had almost forgotten was possible. For the first time, my schedule wasn't defined by her commitments, her needs, her events. It was mine, just mine. I decided to enroll in a painting class, something I had always wanted, but never dared to do because I didn't have the time, or I couldn't waste money on silly things. I walked into the first class, shy, feeling out of place, but soon realized that no one knew me as her mom, or as the lady who paid for the wedding. I was simply another woman with a brush in hand and the desire to learn. Every stroke I made on the canvas felt like slowly erasing the invisible chains that had held me for so long. I also started to travel more, took small trips to nearby towns, visited old friends, rediscovered places I had always dreamed of knowing. And in each of these trips, I realized how much I had postponed my life for hers. And paradoxically, the more I distanced myself physically, the closer I felt to myself, the loneliness that I had feared for years now became companionship. Her absence that used to hurt now became space, a space that finally I could occupy. One day, I decided to remodel the house, swapped out the old furniture, painted the walls, moved the frames around, and in a symbolic gesture, I removed all the photos from the shelves. Birthdays, graduations, family trips. I packed them all in a box, carefully, without resentment, but with the certainty that that chapter needed to be closed. In their place, I put images of my recent travels, of the paintings I'd made, of the flowers I'd grown. My story, finally, was starting to have new protagonists, or better yet, for the first time, me as the protagonist. When she came to visit me a few weeks later, she noticed the changes, looked around, a little unsure of what to say, until, in a surprised tone, she asked, "Wow, where are all those photos?" I smiled, naturally, and replied, "They're put away. I decided to place myself at the center of my own life." She chuckled, a bit awkwardly, and commented, "Wow, getting philosophical, huh?" But I knew that behind that joke, there was a tinge of discomfort. After all, she had always had me as a guarantee, as someone whose life revolved around her, and now, no more. We didn't talk much that day. She seemed busy, on her phone, talking about commitments, trips with Daniel, dinners with the in-laws. I listened, politely, but without that urge to insert myself into her routine. Like I used to. I didn't ask if she needed help, didn't offer advice, didn't insist she stay longer. I just walked her to the door, kissed her cheek goodbye, and went back to my renovated living room, to my new space, to my new life. In the days that followed, she sent a few messages, less than before, more formal, and for the first time, I wasn't unsettled by that. I didn't wait for her to invite me for coffee, didn't feel anxious about the absence of Sunday lunch invitations. I was too busy learning new recipes, reading books, caring for my plants, painting canvases, living. And in that living, I realized that motherhood, although a part of me, is not, and never should have been, the whole of who I am. Some friends asked me, "Don't you miss her? Doesn't this distance hurt?" I smiled and answered, "I miss what I thought we had, but not what we really had." Because now I saw our relationship had always been built on my availability and her absence. I always ran after, always offered myself, always did more than she ever even knew. And now, by stopping, I realized she doesn't know how to come to me, and that is no longer my problem. That day, after finishing another painting at my class, the teacher approached and complimented me. "You have an incredible sensitivity." I smiled, thanked her, and left the class, walking slowly through the nearby park, observing the trees, the birds, the sky, and for the first time in years, I thought, I'm happy, not for being recognized by my daughter, not for being included in the photos or the speeches, but for finally recognizing myself, and that I discovered is worth more than any applause or tribute. Little did I know that soon she would show up with news capable of shaking this newly found peace. It was just an ordinary morning, as I sat on my balcony, sipping my coffee, when the phone rang. Her name popped up on the screen, and as had become usual, I took a deep breath before answering. "Mom, I need to tell you something," she said, with that vibrant enthusiasm I knew so well. I smiled, even before hearing the rest. "I'm pregnant," she announced, laughing and crying at the same time. For a moment, I closed my eyes, letting the news just hang in the air. I felt genuine joy, but at the same time, a silent chill in my stomach, because I knew what was coming next. I really want you to be part of this, to be close, to help me, she continued, as if the pieces of an old chessboard were sliding right back into their usual positions, as if, with that news, automatically, I would resume my usual role, available, present, fixing everything, while she lived out the big moments. But for the first time, I didn't feel that immediate impulse to offer myself, to say, "Of course, honey, I'm here for everything." Instead, I took a deep breath and responded calmly, "Congratulations, sweetheart. I'm happy for you." On the other end, a brief silence. She surely expected a different reaction. Maybe a shout of joy, tears, or a flood of motherly advice. But there was none of that. There was only my tranquility. "Mom, are you okay?" she asked, her voice a mix of surprise and slight discomfort. I smiled softly and replied, "I'm fine, really fine." And it was true. I was fine for the first time in years. Fine with myself, with my choices, with my boundaries. She insisted, "I want you to be part of this. It'll be really important." I stayed silent for a few seconds, pondering. I wanted to ask, important how? Like I was at the wedding, paying the bills, while sitting at the table by the exit. Like I was all my life, helping in the background, but never invited into the photos. But I didn't say any of that. I just responded with the same calm. "You didn't want me involved in the most important day of your life. I've learned." That response threw her off. She went silent for a few seconds, then tried to justify, "Oh, Mom, it was all so rushed. You know how it is. The planning, the stress." I took a deep breath, letting her explain, even though I knew there was nothing to explain. "I know, sweetheart. And because of that, now, I also know how to respect the space you gave me." She pushed again. "But now it's different. This is my child, your grandchild." There was an emotional appeal in her voice, as if the blood tie would be enough to make me forget everything. But it wasn't. Not anymore. "Yes, now it's different. Because now I'm different too." I said that with such deep peace that on the other end she could only mumble, "Oh, okay." There were no shouting matches, no accusations, no tears, just that, "Oh, okay." That sounded like a silent recognition that for the first time things wouldn't be the same, not because I didn't love her, but because now, finally, I loved myself too. She tried to change the tone, asked about my activities, my trips, my painting. I answered, naturally, telling her about my classes, my little getaways, my new friends. She listened, quietly, and for the first time, I had the impression that she was actually listening, not just waiting for the moment to ask for something. At the end of the conversation, she said, "Let's meet up soon and talk in person." And I replied, "Sure, when it works," and hung up. I stared at the phone for a few seconds, reflecting on that exchange. There was no anger, no resentment, just a quiet certainty. I could no longer be who she expected me to be. I could no longer erase myself, offer myself up completely, expecting in return just an invite to a photo. It wasn't about her anymore, or the baby, or the role of grandmother, which I would surely love to play. It was about me, about who I had become after so much silence, so much sacrifice, so much absence of myself. I stood up from the chair, walked to the shelf where one of my latest paintings sat, an open field, bathed in light, with a lone figure walking away. In the distance, I looked at that image and smiled. Maybe that was me, walking a new path without a map, but for the first time with freedom. And at that moment, I knew I didn't need to deny my history with her. I just needed not to let her define my present. But I wondered, would I be able to hold on to this choice? When the birth got closer, the weeks that followed that call passed quietly, and for the first time, I wasn't counting the days, waiting for news from her. I didn't ask how the pregnancy was going, didn't offer help, didn't ask if she needed anything. Not out of indifference, but because finally I understood my life could no longer be a satellite orbiting around hers. It felt strange to realize that by stopping the chase, I didn't feel empty as I had always feared, but whole. I spent a lot of time reflecting on motherhood, on the love I gave, on the years I invested, making sure she felt loved, safe, protected. I never regretted any of that. I don't regret it now. The love I gave was sincere, deep, maybe even naive, but it was mine, and only I know how much it cost me. What I do regret, perhaps, is believing that love and sacrifice were inseparable synonyms, that to truly love, I always had to erase myself. I realized that loving also means setting boundaries, teaching the other to recognize our worth, to respect our space, and maybe I failed in that. I raised a daughter who got used to my lack of boundaries, who normalized my total availability, who never had to ask if I wanted to. She just knew I would, and I did. Out of love, yes, but also out of fear. Fear of not being enough, of not being needed, of being forgotten. Today I understand that motherhood, like any other relationship, needs to be built by two sides. One-sided love isn't enough to sustain a bond, and in realizing that, I felt a freedom I had never known before. I no longer need to wait to be invited into the photos. I no longer need to long to be mentioned in the speeches. I no longer need to always offer myself without being asked. I can love from a distance. I can support without erasing myself. I can exist outside the role of mother. When I received the invitation to the baby shower, I sat staring at the envelope for long minutes. It was beautiful, well made, full of delicate flowers, but curiously, it didn't awaken in me that old anxiety to be present, to prepare everything, to solve every detail. I simply placed the invitation on the table and went to make tea for myself. I didn't reply right away, not because I wanted to provoke or punish, but because now my presence was a choice, not an automatic obligation. I went out for a walk, as I've been doing almost every morning, and as I felt the cold wind on my face, I thought about how many times I gave up on myself without even realizing it, how many opportunities one declined, how many dreams I postponed, how many desires I silenced, all in the name of what I believed to be the ideal maternal love. But now, looking at this woman that my path has become, I realize ideal love is the kind that doesn't destroy us in the process, and that to love in a healthy way, I first had to learn to love myself. I don't feel resentment toward her. On the contrary, I feel compassion because I know that she too is trapped in this narrative that I myself helped build, that I would always be there, available, present, ready for anything. And now that I'm not anymore, she also needs to learn how to deal with this new space, with this new mother who still loves her deeply, but who chose, for the first time, to put herself first. Before going to bed that night, I went to the shelf where I keep my paintings and gently ran my fingers over the frame of one of my favorite pieces, a path winding through trees, open, with no defined destination. I looked at that image and thought, that's how I feel now, walking, not knowing exactly where, but free. And that freedom, more than anything else, is what I want to carry from now on. I lay down in bed, turned off the light, and before closing my eyes, I whispered to myself, you did what you could, and now it's all okay. Because, finally, it really was, for the first time in years, I felt that my story no longer needed anyone's validation, that my worth no longer depended on my daughter's recognition or on the role I played in her life. My worth, I discovered, was always within me, and only me, and maybe, for the first time, she was beginning to see that too. I never imagined I'd run into her like that. So suddenly, I was at a cafe, when I often go to, a quiet space where I like to read and sometimes just watch life pass by. I was there, alone, with an open book and a cup of tea, when I heard a familiar voice, a bit hesitant, Mom. I looked up, and there she was, standing, her belly already showing, her face a mix of surprise, emotion, and a kind of insecurity I'd never seen before. I smiled, calmly, and simply said, Hi, sweetheart. How are you? She came closer, slowly, like someone unsure if she could or should step into the space. She pulled the chair in front of me, sat down, without asking, and stayed there for a few seconds, silent, just looking at me, as if trying to figure out who this woman was, sitting here. You're different, she said, almost in a whisper. I smiled again, and, with serenity, replied, I am. She lowered her eyes, fiddled with the napkin on the table, and then, suddenly, the tears started falling, quiet, uncontrollable. I just sat there, watching her, without that immediate urge I always had to get up, hug her, comfort her, fix everything. I simply remained present, but without offering myself as the solution to that pain. She took a deep breath and, with a voice full of emotion, said, I miss you so much. I calmly closed the book, set it on the table, and asked, with the same tranquility, Do you miss my presence or my function? She looked at me, surprised, unsure how to answer, and I, for the first time, didn't feel the need to make it easier for her. I made so many mistakes, she said finally, through tears. I erased you from my life and didn't even realize it. I nodded slightly, saying nothing, letting her find the words, without interrupting, without easing the weight she needed to carry. I thought you'd always be there, always, and when you stopped being there, I didn't know what to do. She kept crying, and I just listened, and for the first time, I understood that my silence now was not omission, but maturity. After a few minutes, she lifted her eyes and said, I want my daughter to know her grandma. I want her to have you around. I felt a tightness in my chest. Of course, the maternal instinct almost made me reach out, offer comfort, say I'd always be there, as I always had been. But I took a deep breath and, with serenity, replied, Maybe one day. She looked at me, surprised, probably expecting that I'd immediately say, Of course. But I didn't, because now I no longer needed to rush or erase myself She tried to argue. But she's your granddaughter. I smiled and replied, and I am the woman you learned to leave aside. Now, I'm learning not to leave myself. She lowered her eyes in silence, and I knew that in that moment she understood. Maybe she didn't agree. Maybe she didn't fully accept it, but she understood, and that was enough. I stood up, placed money on the table, and said, "Take care, honey." She looked at me, eyes filled with tears, and whispered, "I love you." I smiled, leaned in, and kissed her forehead softly. "I love you too," I replied, and walked away, strolling quietly along the sidewalk, feeling the fresh morning air, hearing the sounds of the city with a lightness I had never felt before. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew she was there, sitting, processing, not just that conversation, but everything I had been transforming silently for months. As I walked, I thought that this encounter wasn't a new beginning, but maybe an invitation, a seed, and like all seeds, it would need time, space, maturity to grow. It was no longer up to me to water it alone. Now, she also would need to learn to care, and I would keep going for the first time, taking care of myself. But first, there was still one last photo left to take. Days later, after that meeting at the cafe, I went back home, and while organizing some old boxes, I found the wedding album. It was there, heavy, silent, like a physical record of everything that no longer belonged to who I am. I ran my hand over the cover, took a deep breath before opening it. The pages, intact, well organized, each photo carefully printed, but none of them with me in it. I kept flipping through, slowly, feeling a strange mix of nostalgia, pain, and a relief. I got to the page with the classic shots, the newlyweds cutting the cake, the toasts, the speeches, and there she was, beside her husband's family, smiling, radiant, surrounded by everyone she chose to have by her side that day. And me, once again, outside the frame, outside the scene, outside the official memory of that moment. For a few seconds, I thought about closing the album and putting it back, but then, instinctively, I opened the drawer and took out a pair of scissors. I didn't hesitate. With steady hands, I removed one of the pages, the one where she smiled next to Daniel's mother, the same who took the place that once, I thought, would be mine. I didn't do it out of anger or bitterness. I simply understood that in that album, there was too much space for stories that weren't mine, and too much absence of the woman I had become. I left the removed page on the table, took a deep breath, and in the empty space, I pasted a photo of me taken recently in Paris, alone, smiling, with the Eiffel Tower in the background. Below it, I wrote in my firm handwriting, "The day I chose myself." I closed the album, feeling, for the first time, that it was complete, not because all the photos were there, but because it finally represented who I am. Now, a woman who learned not to depend on being remembered to exist, who no longer needs to be in every picture to know that she lived, that she loved, that she fought, and that now she simply chose to be. I put the album back in the box and closed the lid firmly, as if closing not just an object, but an entire life cycle. I walked over to the shelf where it used to be, but decided not to put it there anymore. I left the box in the closet among old books and keepsakes that one day I might revisit, or maybe not. I didn't feel the need to say goodbye to those images. I just turned my back and moved on, light, calm, at peace. I poured a glass of wine, sat on the balcony chair, watching the sunset, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and lavender. I smiled, thinking about how, once, her absence consumed me, paralyzed me, made me doubt myself. And now it was different. The love remained, yes, but free of chains, free from the need to be proven at every turn, free from silent expectations and unmet hopes. The phone buzzed. On the table, a message from her. "Mom, are you okay?" I picked up the phone, looked at the screen for a few seconds, and put it back down, without replying right away. I didn't need to. There was no urgency, no guilt, just the certainty that if and when I wanted, I would reply, but that my life was no longer tied to this compulsive need to always be available. I looked around. The well-tended plants, the freshly painted canvases, the books scattered, all spoke of me, of the woman who for so long was forgotten behind the role of mother, but who finally had emerged, whole, serene, her own. I smiled, raised my glass, and made a silent toast to freedom, to self-love, to the courage of finally putting myself at the center of my own life. And as the day faded and night quietly arrived, I closed my eyes and thought, never again will I allow myself to be erased from the photos of my own story, because now I know who holds the camera is me. And if you enjoyed this story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Here, we share stories every day